Alright, here we go with a new educational chess game. My opponent starts with the pawn to d4, and I'm going to play knight to f6. He plays knight to c3, aiming to support the push to e4, so I play d5, still keeping control over that e4 square. For now, that's the critical square in the opening. He plays e3, freeing up the bishop on f1, but locking in the bishop on c1. You should also notice that by developing his knight to c3, he blocked his c2 pawn, while my c7 pawn is still free. And the pawn on the c-file can go attack the center with this push to c5. And he won't even be able to reinforce with a c3 push. So I play c5. If he takes, the c5 pawn is pretty easy to win back. I'll probably advance the e-pawn so that the bishop can attack. He actually takes, but as a result, he loses influence in the center. So I could play e5 right away. And why not, actually? I'm going to play the pawn to e5 right now. So I build a pawn center with the e5 and d5 pawns, and I open up the f8 bishop to win back the pawn on c5. If he plays b4, I can try to play a5. He won't be able to play a3 because there will be exchanges on b4, and my rook will be able to catch his rook. He plays bishop to b5, check. So I can play the d7 bishop, but I think I'll go for the c6 knight instead. And that way, if he takes the knight, I can recapture and it strengthens my center. And as always, I'm looking to win back the c5 pawn afterwards. And like I said, if there are moves like b4, I'll play moves like a5 to break up the b pawn, so I can then take the c pawn. So in this opening, he didn't really handle the central pawn structure very well. He played knight to c3 very quickly, blocking the pawn on c2. He deprived himself of that c-file pawn, which could have attacked the central d-file pawn. He plays knight to e2. So I take the pawn on c5. And after that, I'll try to show you what it's like to have a pair of pawns in the center. What's the point of having central space advantage? He plays pawn to a3. So why does he play that? I don't know. Maybe he wants to attack my bishop by pushing to b4. My bishop can simply retreat, maybe not to d6 because that would block the queen from protecting the b5 pawn, but maybe to b6 and then reposition to c7 later. I'll just castle kingside. So, having a strong pawn center usually helps with attacks against the future kingside castle. You see, he just castled kingside. And the fact that he no longer has the d-pawn allowed my e-pawn to advance to e5, and my pawn on e5 could even go to e4 later. What's the point of that? To open up the diagonal, to reposition the bishop for an attack, and to look for attacks on h2. Especially since he doesn't even have a knight on f3. But anyway, even if he had the knight on f3, it would get chased away by this push to e4. And the knight can come to g4 to attack, the queen can come to h4, and I'm going to have all my pieces heading toward his kingside castle, especially since the bishop is also aiming in that direction. The rooks can also be placed on the e, d, and c files, and sometimes move to the 6th rank to join the attack as soon as the knight moves. So, I'm not going to play bishop to d6 right away because he could take, and after I recapture, he could take back. If I didn't have the pawn on e5, I could play bishop check and take his queen, but I can't because the pawn is on e5. So I could play e4, move the pawn to e4. But I don't want to reveal my intentions just yet. I think I'll just play rook to e8, placing the rook on the file. And let's see what he's going to play, because he's running out of moves. Pushing to e4 simply loses a pawn for him. Pushing the f-pawn weakens his king's defenses, especially since there's that diagonal. If he takes my knight, recapturing strengthens my center, so I really don't see what he can do. So I'm going to play rook to e8. If he puts his knight on g3 to try to bring in a defender, I can look to push the h-pawn, maybe g6, then h5, then h4 to drive his knight back, and maybe later h3 to break down the g2 pawn. So he plays b4. And here, I'm pretty happy with this push to b4 because I'll be able to reposition my bishop on this diagonal. For example, bishop to c7, queen to d6, looking to play e4 to put pressure on h2. And the fact that he plays b4, it's not a trivial move because the b-pawn is the only pawn capable of defending the squares on the semi-open c-file. For me, this c-file is also a file for attack and pressure. And by moving the pawn to b4, sure, it's true, he attacks my bishop, but he won't be able to protect his knight anymore. And so, if I manage to put a queen or a rook on the file, the knight on e2 will have to protect the knight on c3. He won't be able to leave like that, or he'll play bishop b2, of course, but the knight will be weakened anyway. So, I play bishop to b6. So this game, in my opinion, is going to be instructive in how to launch an attack on the opponent's kingside castling, thanks to having a strong pawn center and a central space advantage. You can see how the pieces can be positioned. Bishop to c7, queen to d6, the pawn pushed to e4, the knight coming in, so attacks on h2, and sometimes the rook can also join in. So he plays a4. He's definitely looking to play a5, but I could play bishop to c7, and then he leaves the b4 pawn. So I can play knight takes b4 and win a pawn. But the bishop could take my rook, so that's not possible. I'm not going to do it. I can let him play a5 and put the bishop on c7. After that, he's still going to try to play a6, you know. The little rascal. He'll want to play a6 to try to distract my b pawn and take on c6 to attack both rooks. So I still need to be careful. I think I'm going to position my bishop on c7 right away, ready to go attack the rook. So if I play queen to d6, I threaten e4 to attack the h2 pawn and threaten me. And if he plays knight to g3, I can push the h pawn to distract his knight. He plays a5. He really wants to play a6, you know, to destabilize the b7 pawn. So I think I'm going to play a6 myself. Or maybe queen to d6. That way it protects my knight. And if he plays a6, I can play the intermediate move e4 since I'm threatening mate, but I can also capture since the queen is defending, or just not react. But I feel like my pawn structure gets a bit worse if he manages to play a6. So I'm going to play a6 myself. I don't know if it's the best move. We'll look at the analysis, because at the end of each instructional game, I offer an analysis to see if I could have improved my play, especially in the opening. Now, he's not forced to capture, you know. He can retreat to a4. If he takes, I recapture with the pawn. That blocks my file, but it opens the b file, and besides, the pawn on c6 will strengthen my center, making it stronger and even indestructible. So he takes on c6. Now, there's a new factor. This capture on c6 gives me the only light-squared bishop. So, I have the pair of bishops, and I'll need to try to play on the light squares. But my opponent plays knight to a4, and he's going to try to play on the dark squares. Why the dark squares? Because he has an extra piece to play on the dark squares. And his idea is precisely to play knight to a4 to get into c5 and try to bother me with that knight on c5. It's interesting, but I think it's not enough. If I play queen to d6, and he plays knight to b6, he attacks my rook and my light-squared bishop. I play e4, threatening mate, so I wouldn't be afraid of losing the rook. He might play knight to g3, maybe to block. And that bothers me because if I save my rook, he could take my light-squared bishop. I want to have my light-squared bishop in the attack. So do you understand? He has to play on the dark squares. That's what I told you. So I'm thinking I'll play rook to b8. That way he can't come into b6. I'm attacking the b4 pawn and trying to provoke the pawn to move to c3. That way, he won't have a bishop on b2 and a bishop on the diagonal. I'll start with rook to b8. So he freed up the c-pawn. He could also try to attack my center by pushing to c4, but he plays c3 because he had to defend the pawn on b4. And so, as a result, his dark-squared bishop gets more and more trapped. I play queen to d6 as planned, and I'm one move away from pushing e4, which will unleash this bishop-queen attacking battery along the diagonal. So how is he going to deal with the mate threat on h2? If he plays g3, he opens up the light squares. And since I'm the only one with a light-squared bishop, I can infiltrate. And after the e4 push, if he plays knight to g3, I play h5. I'm not afraid of knight takes, even though his queen also controls the h5 square, because he gets checkmated right away on h2. And you can see how we're building the attack behind his pawn structure. Behind this wall of pawns in the center, I have a space advantage, so I'm able to place my pieces and prepare the offensive against his king. He doesn't have that same freedom. Look, his pieces can't get into position to attack my king. And that's the nature of the center. In reality, both of our castle positions are untouched. He has the h, g, and f pawns near his king, lined up in a good defensive position, just like I do. But it's the nature of the center, this central space advantage, that makes his king vulnerable. So, the center, the possession of a strong center, is one of the key factors in putting the opponent's king in danger. And that's why, in the opening, you have to be very careful about the pawn structure you create, the one you shape in the center. And that was his biggest mistake, because he was developing, bringing out his pieces, attacking my pawns. But he very quickly blocked his pawn on c2, you see? Whereas I was able to use my c-pawn to attack his center, while his c-pawn was blocked by the knight on c3. So not only could his c-pawn not attack my center, but it couldn't even reinforce his own center. And that's how I ended up with a central pawn majority, and therefore with assets to attack his king. And you see, here he plays g3, so he doesn't understand the color strategy. I have a light-squared bishop, and he doesn't. Now he's going to suffer on the light squares because by putting all his pawns on dark squares, he's really trapping his dark-squared bishop, but he's giving me complete freedom on the light squares. I can come in on h3, of course, and attack his rook. But I could also look for ways to get in on f3, knight to e4, knight to g5, knight to f3. Now, if I have a bishop on f3 and a knight on h3, that would actually be checkmate. But the problem with bishop to g4 is that he'll play f3 against me. That's why I'm looking to play bishop to h3 first, to distract his rook, and then maybe bishop to g4 so I can settle on f3. And after that, I'll have a choice. Either I maneuver with my queen, queen to e6, queen to h3, and checkmate on g2, or knight to e4, knight to g5, and checkmate on h3, targeting those weak white squares, which is where I have the advantage. So I don't play crazy g4 right away because of f3. First, bishop to h3. I want to distract his rook so he can't support the f3 pawn push when I play bishop to g4. I could also play e4, but with e4, I give him the f4 square for his knight, which would attack my bishop. So if my queen wasn't in front, I would still play that because I could immediately trade my dark-squared bishop for the knight, since my dark-squared bishop doesn't help me infiltrate on the light squares. So I'm ready to trade it for his knight, but right now I can't. Bishop to g4, in my opinion, he's going to move his queen to avoid the pin, and I'll settle my bishop on f3. So, the idea is bishop to f3 and then bring the queen in. Earlier, I was talking about checkmate with bishop f3, knight e4, knight g5, knight h3, but here, there wouldn't be mate because he no longer has the rook on f1. He moved it. I had forgotten about that detail. But of course, after bishop f3, I can bring my queen in via d7 or e6 to get to h3 and checkmate on g2. And also, after bishop f3, as soon as I move my queen to e6 or d7, I can play e4 without worrying about knight f4, because I could exchange the dark-squared bishop. So he plays queen to d3. And here, I think I'm going to play e4 right away. I could still play bishop to f3. But if I play bishop to f3, he'll come to f5. To control that diagonal and to prevent my queen from using it. I think it's not very good for him because he might end up locked up with his lady. Actually, I should take a closer look at that. Bishop to f3, queen to f5, bishop to e4. His queen still has some squares. Not many, but she still has a few. Alright, I'm playing the pawn to e4. So, he's going to play queen to d4. And right after that, I'll move my queen over. That way, if knight to f4 happens, I can give up the dark-squared bishop. I don't need the dark-squared bishop. He needs his knight to defend the light squares, to come to f4 and protect h3 and g2. So right now, I'm pretty happy because his dark-squared bishop is completely blocked in, while my light-squared bishop is starting to infiltrate his position. And you can see the space on the a file. That also allows for rook transitions. All the black pieces can actually join the attack. So, he played queen to d4. I'm checking if I have something preferable, something better, but I don't see anything. So I'm going to play queen to e6. But with queen to e6, he'll have knight to c5 to attack my queen. But with queen to d7, it's the same thing. He'll have knight to c5 every time. And his move knight to f4 is coming. Because I was even considering rook to b5. If he plays knight to c5, I take his knight. I don't need my rook for the attack. But if I play rook to b5, he'll play knight to f4. And here, maybe queen to d7. Knight to c5, rook takes, queen takes, my dark-squared bishop takes his knight, he recaptures, I play bishop to f3, I slip in on h3, and I checkmate him on g2. Or I can play queen to a6, and if he plays knight to c5, I come to d5, let him take on a6, but no, his knight. The problem is, even if he comes to c5 and takes on a6, he'll attack my dark-squared bishop. I need my dark-squared bishop to trade it for his knight, so look, I play rook to b5. I play rook to b5, and if he plays c4, well, I can play rook to b4 and I've won a pawn. And if he plays knight to f4, I'll move my queen to d7, to attack and trade my dark-squared bishop for his knight. I'll infiltrate with my bishop on f3 and my queen on h3. And as soon as there's a knight on c5, I eliminate his knight on c5. So I don't need my rook that's completely on the queen side while my operations are on the king side. And I don't need the dark-squared bishop since I'm aiming to infiltrate on the white squares. He puts the knight here, you see, on c5. So I take on c5 as planned. He'll recapture with the queen. He'll try to exchange queens. He realizes his king is weaker, but I'm going to decline. I'll play queen to d7 or queen to e6. I'm not sure which yet. Here, I don't know if it's better to play queen to e6 or queen to d7. Maybe it doesn't make any difference, but sometimes it does. Well, he recaptured with the pawn anyway. I think I'm going to play queen to d7 to eventually leave some maneuvering room for the rook, to leave the file open for the rook. So queen to d7. Now, the idea is bishop to f3, queen to h3, queen to g2 mate. His dark-squared bishop and his rooks can't help him. Only the knight can help, but as I told you, as soon as it comes to f4, we take it out with the dark-squared bishop. And it's not just the bishop and the queen. I could also have the knight coming to g4, with the queen on h3, the bishop on f3, and the knight on g4, all on the light squares. I control all the light squares against him. And you see, that's what the color strategy is all about. When you notice weaknesses on a certain color, you should try to create piece exchanges that will let you exploit those weaknesses, especially if they're near the opponent's king, because that can lead to checkmating attacks. So, I don't care about being down the exchange, or about not having a certain bishop. What matters to me is being able to break through and checkmate. His dark-squared bishop can't help him, and neither can his two rooks. His queen is centralized, but she has no way to break through. And his knight will get traded off as soon as it comes to f4. So he plays c4. Of course, he's hoping I'll take so we can trade queens, but I'm never going to do that. So, I bring my bishop back to f3. Now, how is he going to stop the queen from coming to h3? I don't know. The only way is with f4, but as I've told you for a while now, the plan is ready. It's bishop takes f4. If I want to play on the light squares, I'll gladly trade my dark-squared bishop for any of those pieces. And here, you see, he's not down a piece. He actually has a material advantage, but he has fewer ideas. Often in chess, ideas outweigh a certain material deficit, especially when those ideas are aimed at the king. Now, he's not playing anymore. He's looking for a move, but I'll speed up this sequence in editing to take you straight to the move he played. There you go. He plays knight to f4. It's the only move to prevent queen to h3, but you have to take it. There's a certain satisfaction in making this exchange when you've set it up beforehand, of course, because it's the triumph of strategy. If he recaptures with the g-pawn, it's immediately queen to g4 check followed by queen to g2 mate. And if he recaptures with the e-pawn, queen to h3 followed by queen to g2 mate. If he recaptures on f4 with the g-pawn, I can also play queen to h3, not give him check, and then mate him on g2 afterwards. It might even be more elegant to approach on the white squares without giving check and deliver mate directly. There you go. He took back with the e-pawn, queen to h3. And look, the queen, the bishop, the knight that can come to the white square, the queen that can come to mate on g2. You can clearly see all the white squares that have been used. He has very good defenses on the black squares, but it doesn't matter because I'm infiltrating on the white squares and I've changed the material balance through exchanges to get pieces that can play on the white squares. He doesn't have the light squared bishop. He doesn't have the knight either. So I have 2 extra pieces to play on the white squares. He has rooks, of course, but rooks can't really sneak in and counter infiltrations in pawn structures against bishops or knights. Rooks are mainly effective in open positions where there are open files and space, which isn't the case here. So the computer gives me 91% accuracy compared to 81% for my opponent. So my opponent starts with d4. I play knight to f6. I control the e4 square, and then he plays knight to c3. But by playing knight to c3, he blocks the c pawn, which allows me to play d5. Because, you see, he plays knight to c3 to support the push to e4, but this move d5 is going to block him. The usual main move is c4. That way, if I play the pawn to d5, it's the c4 pawn that will take out my pawn on d5. And then, his e-pawn will have a better chance of advancing to e4 with the help of the knight on c3. So first, you need to play c4 before playing knight to c3 and supporting the push to e4. But here, he plays knight to c3 right away. So I play d5, and he plays e3. That frees up the bishop on f1, but it blocks the bishop on c1. This opening is still a bit passive for him. And I use the c-pawn. I haven't blocked my c-pawn, so I use it to attack his center, with the idea of reinforcing with knight to c6 to attack twice, and for the knight to help with the push to e5 to keep attacking and gain central expansion, taking more space in the center. He decides to take on c5. So the immediate push to e5, the pawn center, and the attack on the pawn at c5. And you can see that he mismanaged the pawn structure. He didn't really understand the structural stakes. He plays bishop to b5, check. If he had played b4, I would play a5. He can't play a3 because of the exchange, and he loses the rook. So he decided to play bishop to b5, check. I could block with my bishop on d7, but I prefer to play knight to c6 to keep my light-squared bishop aiming at his future kingside castle, because I know that the pawn center will allow me to launch attacks against his king. And you can see that the light-squared bishop was crucial for the rest of the game, for the success of the attack. He plays knight to e2. He doesn't want to play knight to f3 because he knows that my e-pawn, since it hasn't been blocked by his d-pawn, can come to e4 and chase his knight away. That's why he goes straight to e2. I take back the pawn on c5. He plays a3. Here, he's a bit short on ideas. Sure, he wants to play b4, but it's not really a threat. So I'll continue my development with kingside castling. He castles kingside. Here, I could immediately play the pawn to e4, but I don't want to do that because I would give up the f4 square, and both knights would team up with the queen to attack the central pawn. I prefer not to reveal my intentions right away, to keep some flexibility in my central pawn structure, and to advance when it will be decisive, when it really matters. So, for now, I prefer to play rook to e8. The rook on e8 can sometimes use the 6th rank to join the attack. He plays b4, attacking my bishop, which moves to b6. The computer says it would have been better to retreat to e7 or f8, though I don't really understand why. Maybe simply to avoid the advance of the a-pawn, because then the bishop could take on d4. But I wanted him to end up on this diagonal. My intention is actually to attack his rook. He plays pawn to a4. I play bishop to c7. He plays pawn to a5. Here, I'm going to put an end to the advance of his a-pawn. I play a6. I attack his bishop and he trades. That strengthens my center. He plays knight to a4. He's trying to play to the c5 square. Why not the b6 square if I let my guard down? I play rook to b8 right away. That way, I control the b6 square and attack b4. I want to encourage him to play c3, so he blocks his own play on the dark squares, blocking his dark squared bishop. And it actually works well. He plays c3. Now, I play queen to d6. And here, the computer tells me that e4 would have been better right away. But I played queen to d6, and the computer penalizes me, lowering my evaluation a bit here. But it's going to bounce back right away for black, because here, my opponent is really afraid of the attack on h2, and I was counting on that. By the way, he's going to play the pawn to g3. But that's not the right way to defend, because sure, he'll block the dark squared bishop and the queen on the diagonal, but he's going to open up all the white squares for the light squared bishop. He's going to allow the possibility of infiltration on the white squares, especially since I have the advantage when it comes to playing on that color. The computer prefers to play f3 here with white. If I push e4, then play f4, but don't touch the g-pawn, which needs to defend the white squares. Here, he played g3. The bishop infiltrates. Notice that I don't play bishop to g4 right away because he could play f3. I play bishop to h3 to distract his rook, and now bishop to g4 to set up my bishop on f3. He plays queen to d3. I push e4. He plays queen to d4. And here, I know he wants to play knight to c5. He wants to play that square. So, I decide to play rook to b5 because I want to trade my rook for his knight. I know I don't need my rook for the attack. But I want to eliminate all those minor pieces that defend white squares or could defend white squares, meaning the knight on a4, but also the knight on e2. So I'm ready to trade the dark squared bishop for the knight on e2 when it comes to f4, and I'm ready to trade my rook for his knight when it comes to c5. Then I'll be able to dominate the white squares with a light squared bishop he won't have, a knight he won't have, and my queen, which will be able to slip through. He has a queen too, but he'll be at a disadvantage when it comes to defending the white squares. He plays knight to c5, that works well. I take with the rook. He decides to recapture with the pawn, but even if he had taken back with the queen, it wouldn't have made much difference. Queen to d7 anyway. He plays pawn to c4. He's trying to open up the position to get some counterplay, but it's too late now. The bishop goes to f3, and the queen is coming. Knight to f4. We trade the dark squared bishop for the knight. And now, the move queen to h3, and he resigns. There's nothing left to do to avoid checkmate, of course. I hope you found this game instructive, enjoyable, and entertaining. You can give me a thumbs up, leave comments, share the video, and support the channel. And we'll meet again for more adventures on the chessboard, for more educational chess games. Goodbye, everyone.